Hey, it's Alex, and this is the Names and Coffee podcast. Oh, thank you guys so much for being so amazing and for all of your wonderful feedback. When I'm sitting here, it feels a lot like a one-way conversation in the moment, but I just love talking to you guys and your feedback. It's so important for me. Just to know how much of my heart to share and what I think I should share, and if it's relevant and helpful for you. So I was born in the 80s with the big boom boxes, and I think the Walkman was in its birth pangs, the very beginning stages, I'm pretty sure. And TVs, when you would the TVs were just these boxes, and you would turn it on, and the screen would be all crystallized, and it'd be basically the dial-up of TVs. But I really grew up I was born in the 80s, but I grew up in the 90s, and back then you'd watch things on VHSs. And being in a small town, I think my brother and I had like 5 VHS tapes that we would just like rotate through. Probably most of them were Disney. And, when movies came out then, you just weren't able to go to a theater. So you'd have to wait for Rite Aid to get them in. And I remember when Lion King came out, and that expectation was pace-worthy. And my brother and I just waited for Rite Aid to get it in. And those were also the days that to develop your camera film, you'd have to bring it there and send it away for like over a week. And when you'd get it back, half the pictures would be like dark and just junk. Oh my gosh, those were growing pain years. And you can bet, we definitely named a couple barn cats after Lion King characters. And when I look back on my childhood, for me it was totally normal because it's the only normal I'd ever known. But now that I'm an adult, I'm like, wow, that really was abnormal for the American family dynamic. That I grew up in a household where my grandma and my great-grandparents lived with us. And that was something that I am so grateful for. And my grandpa, who was really my great-grandpa, we called him Pop. He was the spoiler. He'd go get me and my brother McDonald's and rent the latest Shirley Temple films, and the latest Shirley Temple films, the latest to us. I just love him so much. I miss him so much, and I'm sad that my kids didn't get a chance to grow up with him and that he didn't get a chance to meet them. But he was a Korean War veteran, which is probably why I love the show MASH so much. Like, seriously, it's my favorite show. I watch it through every year, and there are 11 seasons. It's so good. But anyway, my grandpa, he wasn't my grandpa by blood, but he's the only grandpa I'd ever known, and I love him very much. And he was half Cherokee and half Dutch. And so I didn't grow up knowing a lot about, Native American culture, but Grandpa would share a little tidbit, a few things here and there. And that's probably why when I got my hands on Pocahontas, Pocahontas, it just became my favorite Disney movie ever. Pocahontas is just my absolute favorite. I still hate to use the term Disney princess. I've always hated that, but Disney heroine, or I just think Pocahontas is amazing. Mulan definitely comes in a close second. I've watched Mulan 300 million times, and it's so cool. I love her horse, but Pocahontas is my favorite. And I think a part of it was I grew up in, nature and the mountains, and the idea of Grandmother Willow and nature talking to you. I felt like I could relate to that because I was kind of living it, not in a Disney way, but in like a real life way. And I just thought Pocahontas was the coolest. Just so brave and strong. And to be honest with you, when I did my Ancestry DNA test a year ago, I was like hoping so badly that I would discover that I had a piece of Pocahontas somewhere in my genetics. Like, I just wanted that so badly, but lo, there is none. A sad day. So all that being said, I have always really loved Native American culture, and definitely having this deep love for Pocahontas and honoring my grandpa, who is half Cherokee. And I didn't really know a lot about it, but I just know I loved it. And a year ago, my husband got to consult with the Seneca Nation here in New York. I think it was lasted like a year. And it was such a gift to us. It changed our life, that we were given this amazing opportunity and mentored by this woman in the Seneca Nation, and she just gifted us with getting to know her culture and finding out so much about the Indigenous and some of the things that they have gone through and still go through. It honestly made us angry because we realized how much of our history had been Puritanized. There's that saying, the victors write history, but that just means that the narrative, the people who wrote it just told you their side of the story, and it's not the complete history. And since going through what I'm calling my Great Root Awakening of all that I discovered last year about the Seneca Nation and their culture, and about all the Indigenous here in the States, it's really caused me to want to delve into history. You can't change historical narratives unless you go back and read, discover history in its completeness. There's so much that I would love to talk about and to share, and all that I learned, but I just feel like I'm totally underqualified. And let me just say that I think everybody needs to go back and relearn history, and talking to the different Indigenous nations in your locale, your communities. I think it's so important. One of the things that really blew me away was, being in New York, in the United States of America. You think Canada is its own nation, right? Well, there are lots of different Canadas. There are lots of different nations across the United States. And I didn't realize that the Seneca Nation was a nation. They've got their own passports. They're their own people and culture and history. And they're such an amazing people. Just like you would get to know Canadians or Germans or the Irish, you need to get to know them too. They're so important. And it was exciting for me because I felt like I got to know my grandpa a little bit more. And then it made me sad that I'd missed out on this as a kid, knowing that I didn't know what I didn't know. But now I'm really, really honored that I get to share these things with my own kids. The one last thing that I'd love to share too was, I have Irish and Welsh and German and Polish roots. And so my family came from the other side of the world. And I think that's one of the things about being an American is that we all have roots somewhere else. And there's like this pride in that of knowing where we're from and honoring our heritage. But if you go and ask the Seneca, where are you from? They say, here. Wow. Like, does that not blow you away? Like, that's where they've always been. Since the beginning. Like, that's where they're from. That very land. Is that not crazy? Like, that just blew my socks off. So amazing. And what an honor. I want to honor the Seneca Nation for being so incredibly gracious and kind. It changed my life. Something I discovered along the way of delving back into history was I went back and researched Pocahontas because of my obvious love for her. And, the thing about history is that there are definitely things that were written down, but there's a lot that wasn't written down. And sometimes it's hard to know what people were really like. And a lot of people wonder if, Pocahontas married John Rolfe and it wasn't really for love, like we'd like to think. I also think about, Sacagawea, and I wonder, if her going out and exploring the West was a good time for her or not. I don't know, there's a lot of, being a woman and then being an Indigenous woman is just, a double whammy of having to walk through that. I want to honor these women who were so incredibly strong and brave and just, the women of our history need to be honored as well. So I got to thinking more about Pocahontas and researching her, and one of the things that I discovered is that with Indigenous culture, their names are so full of meaning, and my grandpa had told me that growing up, and I think that has definitely influenced me with names, because I feel like when you name someone, you're speaking over them, and like that's what the Indigenous culture does. They're speaking over them. And then like that, their inner circle knows their name. People outside of their community, they tell them a different name. They give them like an alias for protection. Very smart. So Pocahontas introduced herself as Pocahontas, and that wasn't actually her name. Her name was Matawaka. And, then eventually she married John Rolfe and moved to England and took on the Christian name Rebecca. And I wish that I could just go back and talk to her and hear her perspectives and her story firsthand. But obviously we can't, so we just do a lot of thinking about it. I think the name Matawaka is so beautiful. When I was in kindergarten, there was this Spanish man who came in and gave us like a Spanish day and told us all what our names would be in Spanish. And so he said that my name would be Alejandra. I thought, wow, that's so beautiful. Like, if I had been born into a Spanish culture, my name would have been Alejandra. And when he would say that, I was like, wow, that's so beautiful. But, my name is Alex. And even when people call me Alexandra, I'm like, no, stop it, I'm Alex. And then that got me thinking about, have you ever seen the Koala Brothers? That cartoon show? To me, it's one of the best kid shows of all time. If you don't know what it is, it's about these two koala brothers, Frank and Buster, and they drive around their little biplane in the outback of Australia and help their community. And so their names are Frank and Buster, but they're in Australia, so they call each other Frank and Busta. And Judah and I called them Frank and Buster. It's spelled Frank and Buster, but they say Frank and Busta. And, Buster could have traveled the whole world being introduced as Buster, the amazing koala brother. But when he got home, it was like, yeah, my peeps call me Busta, Like, he's Busta, and I'm Alex, and she's Mataoaka. Like, we want to be called by our name. Isn't this so, this stuff just fascinates me. Is this fascinating to you as it is to me? So I heard via Appalachian Mountain about this one thing and scooted to the internet and found an article via The Guardian that there's this new movement of republishing women's books who once upon a time had to publish under a man's name, to republish their works with their names on it. So like Marianne Evans, who wrote like Middlemarch and Silas Marner, is going to get to have her books printed with her name on it. And they were saying that 24 other female authors are going to get that. And that makes me so excited. Like, I'm so proud of them. Like, changing historical narratives. Like, I can't stop thinking about this. This is so amazing. And, I wonder, when Mataoaka was in England being called Rebecca, how did that make her feel? Or being called Pocahontas, how did that make her feel? And Marianne Evans, how did that make her feel when everybody was talking up this guy, George Eliot, who was taking credit for something that she had written? I think it's so important, and we take for granted being called by our name and being called our name by people we love and people who we know love us. I think we're at an amazing time in history, because we're kind of the generation that's the question everythingers. Like, did that really happen that way? Is this how it is? I think it's the impetus for a lot of change and a lot of growth, and with that will come growing pains and people who don't understand and etc. But I find it very exciting just to be given the opportunities to learn more of the story. 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, I don't know that I would have had the same opportunities to learn about any of this as I do today. And I just consider myself really lucky. And I'm just so excited. I just find this fascinating and exciting. I just appreciate you guys listening to my heart, even though I'm not very eloquent about it. just thanks so much for sticking with me. I hope it gives you some food for thought and something to chew on. Love you bunches, and live a good life. I hope you live a good life. I hope you live a good life. I hope you live a good